The morning mist still clung to the iron gates of Kensington Palace when Officer James Whitmore arrived for his shift. It was just past 6 in the morning, and London had not yet fully woken up. The streets outside the palace grounds were quiet, save for the occasional taxi or early jogger passing along the tree-lined path. James straightened his uniform, pulled on his white gloves, and nodded to his colleague on the outgoing shift. Another day had begun, and to most people watching from the outside, it looked exactly like every other day. But inside the palace security unit, every single day was treated as if something could go wrong at any moment. That was the job. That was the point. James had been a Royal Protection Officer for 11 years. Before that, he had served in the British Army, completing to tour abroad before coming home and finding a different kind of duty. One that required patience more than combat. One that required sharp eyes, not just strong hands. He had guarded members of the royal family through state events, international tour, and the quiet, ordinary days in between. He had learned over the years that threats did not always announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they came wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. The mail processing room at Kensington Palace was not something most people knew existed. Behind the public image of royal pageantry and waving from gilded balconies, there was a deeply practical and heavily secured operation running every single day. All correspondence addressed to members of the royal family, letters, parcels, gifts, packages of every shape and size, passed through a dedicated security unit before it ever reached human hands. Nothing went through uninspected. Nothing was treated as routine. Every envelope was a question that needed answering. On this particular morning, the volume of mail was heavier than usual. The Princess of Wales had recently attended a high-profile charity event, and public attention had been intense. Supporters from around the world sent letters expressing admiration, small handmade gifts, children's drawings, and occasionally items that required a second look. James had seen all sorts come through over the years. Most of it was genuine and harmless. The outpouring of public affection that surrounded the royal family was real and often touching. But training demanded that sentiment never replace vigilance. It was shortly after 9 in the morning when the package arrived. It came in through the standard delivery channel, processed first by the external postal security team before being transferred to the palace's internal unit. On the outside, it looked ordinary enough. A medium-sized box, roughly the dimensions of a shoebox, wrapped in plain brown packaging. The address label was handwritten, which was not unusual. The return address listed a residential street in the south of England, a small town that James did not immediately recognize. The postage was correct. The weight was unremarkable. Nothing about it, at first glance, triggered any alarm, but James had learned never to trust first glances. He set the package on the processing table and began the standard protocol. He photographed the exterior. He noted the handwriting on the label, the texture of the tape used to seal it, the weight distribution when he gently tilted it from side to side. He pressed lightly along the edges. He listened. These were small things, habits built over years, invisible to anyone watching, but deeply meaningful to someone trained to read them. The package made no sound when tilted. The weight felt slightly uneven, heavier on one side. James made a note and placed it into the X-ray queue. The X-ray machine used in the palace mailroom was not a standard commercial model. It was a high-definition security scanner, the kind used in airports and government buildings, capable of producing detailed internal images that revealed the composition and arrangement of objects inside a sealed container. James had used it thousands of times. He had seen everything from books to bottles of wine, from framed photographs to poorly packaged electronics. He had seen suspicious items that turned out to be nothing and ordinary-looking packages that were anything but. He slid the package into the scanner and waited. The machine hummed softly. The screen filled with the green-tinted image that the X-ray produced. James leaned forward. He stopped. For a moment, he simply looked. His years of training and experience had taught him to process what he saw quickly and calmly, to avoid panic, to think clearly. But what the screen showed him was not something he had seen before. Not in this context, not addressed to a member of the royal family. Not sitting in a palace mailroom on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The image on the screen showed the interior of the box in layered detail. There were objects inside, multiple objects, arranged carefully. The shapes were irregular. Some were dense and dark on the screen, indicating solid or heavy materials. Others showed a different density, suggesting something organic or packed tightly. There was also what appeared to be a small cylindrical component positioned near the center of the package, connected by thin lines to other elements within the box. James had seen enough security briefings, enough training images, enough real-world cases to know that what he was looking at required immediate escalation. He stepped back from the machine and pressed the alert button on the wall without hesitation. The sound it made was not loud. It was designed that way, calibrated to alert personnel without causing public panic. Within 40 seconds, 2 additional officers appeared in the doorway. James pointed to the screen and said nothing at first. He let them look. Their expressions shifted in the same way his had. Protocol took over from there. The package was not touched again. The room was cleared except for the 2 most senior officers on duty. A call went out to the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command, a unit known internally by its operational designation. A second call went to Palace security leadership. Within minutes, a specialist team had been notified and was being mobilized. The package sat on the table, perfectly still, exactly where James had left it. As the world around it quietly accelerated into high alert, James stepped into the corridor and stood with his back against the wall. His breathing was measured, controlled. He had done exactly what he was trained to do. He had not panicked. He had not made assumptions. He had followed the process, trusted the machine, trusted his instincts, and made the call. But standing in the corridor now, in the quiet space between action and consequence, he felt the full weight of what that image had suggested. Someone had addressed that box to the Princess of Wales. Someone had put time and thought into creating whatever was inside it. And someone had intended for it to reach her. The palace's main corridors were operating normally above him. Staff were moving between offices. Somewhere in the building, routines were unfolding, meetings being prepared, correspondence being drafted, schedules being reviewed. None of them knew yet what was sitting to floors below in a room now sealed off from the rest of the building. That was how it was supposed to work. The infrastructure of protection was designed to be invisible until it was needed. Commander Rachel Holt arrived at the palace 35 minutes after the initial alert. She was the senior officer on the counter-terrorism response team. A woman in her late 40s who had spent nearly 2 decades working in security operations across some of the most sensitive environments in Britain. She wore plain clothes, dark jacket, dark trousers, and carried a small case that she set down beside the scanner without ceremony. She looked at the X-ray image for a long time. She asked James 3 questions. When did it arrive? Who handled it before you? What made you flag it before the scan? James answered each question directly. He explained the weight imbalance, the handwriting on the label, the slight give in the packaging when he had pressed along the side. Small things. Things that he could not have pointed to individually as proof of anything. But together, in the accumulated language of years spent learning to read what could not be seen, they had told him to be careful. Rachel nodded once. She did not say whether she agreed with his instinct or was simply logging it as part of the record. She pulled on protective gloves and began preparing the equipment she had brought with her. The specialist team would be required for physical examination. Until they arrived and completed their assessment, the package was to remain exactly as it was. Outside the palace, the morning had continued its ordinary rhythm. Tourists were beginning to gather near the gates, cameras raised, hoping to catch a glimpse of something royal and memorable. A class of school children passed along the footpath, their teacher pointing out the architectural features of the building. Pigeons moved across the courtyard. The sky had cleared and turned a pale, clean blue. None of it knew. None of it could know. James remained on duty. He was given water and told to stay available for questioning. He stood near the window that overlooked the delivery courtyard and watched a second unmarked vehicle pull through the side gate. More specialists. The operation was expanding quietly, drawing more people into its circle without drawing a single eye from the public street beyond the iron fence. He thought about the name on the address label. The name of the princess. He had been assigned to palace security during a period of significant public attention on the royal family. A time when the world seemed to watch every movement, every appearance, every carefully managed statement with a hunger that went beyond ordinary. Part 12 sealed room on the lower level of Kensington Palace had been transformed in a matter of minutes. What had been a standard mail processing area was now an active investigation site. The overhead lights had been supplemented with portable lamps that cast a bright, clinical glow across every surface. The specialist team worked in gloves and protective clothing, moving with a deliberateness that made even the smallest action look significant. Commander Rachel Holt stood near the door, watching, speaking only when necessary. James Whitmore remained in the corridor outside. Separated from the room by a closed door and the full weight of what he had set in motion, the package had been placed on an elevated examination surface and surrounded by containment materials as a precaution. Before any physical opening, the team conducted a secondary scan using a more advanced imaging system, one capable of producing a three-dimensional render of the box's internal contents. The image that came back confirmed what the first scan had suggested. There were multiple distinct objects inside, arranged in a specific configuration. The cylindrical component near the center remained visible and concerning. The organic material, whatever it was, appeared densely packed around the other items. The lead specialist on the team was a man named Dr. Philip Okafor, a forensic security consultant who had worked with the Metropolitan Police and various government agencies for nearly 15 years. He was methodical, unhurried, and said very little as he worked. He examined the exterior of the package one final time before authorizing the opening procedure. The tape along the seams was cut carefully and preserved as evidence. The brown wrapping was peeled back in sections, each piece photographed before being set aside. Beneath the outer layer was a layer of plain white cardboard, and beneath that, folded tissue paper in a pale blue color. The tissue paper was the first unexpected detail. It suggested care. It suggested someone who had taken time with the presentation, who had wrapped the contents not carelessly, but with intention. That detail alone changed the texture of the investigation in a subtle but important way. A carelessly assembled package told one kind of story. A carefully wrapped one told another. Dr. Okafor parted the tissue paper slowly. The room was silent except for the hum of equipment and the soft sound of documentation, photographs being taken, notes being dictated quietly into a recording device. Rachel Holt leaned forward slightly. The two officers flanking her did the same. What the package contained was not a weapon. It was not an explosive device, not a chemical compound, not a biological threat. The cylindrical component that had appeared so alarming in the X-ray image was, in reality, a decorative glass vial, small, sealed with a cork, and filled with what appeared to be dried lavender. The dense organic material surrounding it was a collection of handmade items, pressed flowers between sheets of wax paper, small bundles of herbs tied with ribbon, a folded piece of embroidered fabric. And beneath all of it, resting at the bottom of the box, was a handwritten letter several pages long, folded neatly and sealed with a small wax stamp in the shape of a flower. For a long moment, no one in the room spoke. Then Dr. Okafor set down his tools and exhaled slowly. He looked at the contents, looked at Rachel, and said simply that they would need to examine everything in full, but that his initial assessment indicated no immediate physical threat. The cylindrical component had read as dense because of the glass. The organic material had registered with unusual density because of the concentration of dried plant matter packed tightly together. The configuration that had looked deliberate on the screen was deliberate, but not in the way they had feared. Rachel stepped fully into the room and stood over the table. She looked at the contents for a long time. The pressed flowers, arranged with obvious care. The embroidered cloth, which on closer inspection showed a delicate pattern of bluebirds and branches. The glass vial of lavender, catching the light. The letter in its wax-sealed envelope. These were the objects that had mobilized a counter-terrorism response team, cleared a room, and put an entire security operation into motion on an otherwise quiet Tuesday morning. She asked for the return address to be run immediately. Whatever the contents appeared to be, the investigation was not over. Intent still needed to be established. The person who had sent this package needed to be identified and assessed. The letter needed to be examined for content. The items needed to be tested. The appearance of harmlessness was not the same as the confirmation of it. James was called back into the room a short time later. He stood at the threshold and looked at what had been laid out on the examination table. He had been in this work long enough to know how quickly situations could shift, from catastrophic to inconclusive, from terrifying to strange, from danger to something harder to categorize. He looked at the pressed flowers and the glass vial and the folded embroidered cloth and felt a complex mixture of relief and something that he could not immediately name. The letter was opened under forensic conditions, photographed in its sealed state, and then carefully unfolded. It was 4 pages long, written in a neat, careful hand on cream-colored paper. The handwriting was consistent throughout, no sign of distress, no erratic changes in pressure or style. Rachel read it first, silently, standing at the table. Then she passed it to the documentation officer to be photographed and logged. The letter was from a woman in her late 60s who lived in the small town listed on the return address. She had written to the Princess of Wales, not out of threat or malice, but out of grief and gratitude in equal measure. Her daughter had died 2 years earlier from an illness, and in the months following her daughter's death, she had found comfort in watching the princess speak publicly about mental health and the importance of acknowledging pain. She had felt seen, she wrote, in a way she had not expected from someone of that position. She had wanted to send something made with her own hands, something that held meaning, but had not known whether it would reach anyone who mattered. She had spent months making the items in the box. The embroidered cloth had taken her most of the winter. The pressed flowers were from her daughter's garden. The lavender in the glass vial had grown in a pot on the windowsill of the room where her daughter had slept. The room was very quiet. After Rachel finished summarizing the letter's contents aloud, Dr. Okafor completed his full assessment over the following hour. Every item was tested and documented. The dried plant material was confirmed to be exactly what it appeared: lavender, pressed wildflowers, dried herbs with no chemical alteration. The embroidered cloth was linen. The glass vial was sealed and intact. The letter contained no threatening language, no coded content, no material of concern beyond the emotional weight of what it expressed. The package was, in every meaningful sense, exactly what it looked like: a handmade gift from a grieving mother to a public figure who had, in some small but real way, helped her carry her loss. The investigation did not end there. It could not. The woman's identity was verified through the return address, which matched a real residential property. Officers contacted local police in her area as a matter of protocol, not to alarm her, but to confirm her identity and circumstances. The account she had provided in her letter matched what the local records showed. She was who she said she was. She had meant what she wrote. There was no concealed threat, no hidden agenda, no secondary layer of deception beneath the one that grief and care had constructed. Rachel filed her report that afternoon. The package had triggered a full response for legitimate reasons. The X-ray image had been genuinely ambiguous, the configuration of the glass vial, the dense organic material, and the deliberate arrangement of items had produced an image that any trained officer would have flagged. James Whitmore had done exactly what he should have done. The protocols that governed the processing of Royal Mail existed precisely for situations like this one, where the image told an incomplete story and only the full investigation could reveal the truth. The system had worked. James was debriefed at the end of his shift. He answered every question thoroughly and without defensiveness. He had flagged the package on the basis of observable details that warranted escalation. He had followed protocol without deviation. The outcome, the discovery that the package posed no threat, did not change the validity of the action. In security work, the alternative to acting on incomplete information was not caution. It was risk. And the risk was never abstract. The risk had a name, and on this particular morning, that name was on an address label. He left the palace as the evening was coming in, the sky turning the soft orange and gray of a London dusk. He walked to his car in the staff car park and sat for a moment before starting the engine. He thought about the woman who had made those things. He thought about the months she had spent embroidering bluebirds onto linen, pressing flowers from her daughter's garden, filling a small glass vial with lavender from a windowsill pot.